Next up, the Pixar sequel that many of you don't want, Cars 3. Well, after the first look from the other day, I'm no longer on the fence about this movie. I don't want to see it. Actually, I'm kidding. I really do want to see Cars 3. Cars 3 sounds legitimately good. Cars 3 will be directed by first-time director Brian Fee. He was a storyboard artist on the first two Cars and other Pixar productions. And Cars 3 is going to eschew all the spy stuff of the second one, and it's going to return to what made the first one work. It's going to be about racing. It's going to be about small towns. It's going to be about the road. We now know more about the plot thanks to the first look from the other day. And the reason why they released this first look is because the newest Pixar movie is right around the corner, so they got to have a teaser for Cars 3 before it. So, Cars 3 is going to be set 5 years. They're going to actually do this in real time, so 5 years after the last one, meaning over 10 years after the first one. Because the first one came out June 9th, 2006, so it's going to turn 10. Surreal, huh? Anyways, Cars 3. Lightning McQueen is possibly being outmoded by all the new rookies. He gets beat in a race by this character named Storm. The press starts to question whether McQueen is over the hill, that he, might be close to retiring. So it's going to be kind of like a sports movie, more so than the first one ever was, because the first one was more of a slow down and appreciate the little things in life kind of story. The races were just sort of the frame, the first race at the beginning and then the one at the end. This one is actually going to be all about racing. It's going to be all about, the whole sport of it and everything. It's going to be all about racing. So McQueen looks to this younger sports car, this younger supercar named Cruz Ramirez, and she's going to sort of get him up to speed and help him compete with all these young new rookies. I like that idea. It's not the most mind-bending idea Pixar's ever produced, but then again, neither was the first Cars, and the Cars franchise gets a lot of flack for that. The first Cars is a movie I love. I'm not embarrassed to admit that. I actually love the first Cars. It's John Lasseter's little love letter to, car culture, Americana, small towns, roads, Route 66, that kind of thing. A lot of people don't approve of Cars because Cars is admittedly not the hyper-ambitious Pixar film. Films like The Incredibles, WALL-E, Up, Ratatouille, Inside Out. Cars is decidedly simpler than those films. It's set in a world that people question a lot. They're always like, how does the world of Cars work? It makes no sense. How do they reproduce? My answer to that is, the Cars world was not meant to be taken so seriously. Now, I'm all for serious analyzation of animated family movies. Some people say, you're looking too much into it. It's a kid's movie. It's not supposed to be overanalyzed. I don't like that either. I think animated movies are worthy of such, analyzation. But something like Cars, I really, really think Pixar intended that film to be very lightweight. And the world it's set in is supposed to be a silly what-if scenario that you're not supposed to really question the heck out of. You just sort of go along with it. It's like, okay, it's a world of cars. The people are cars. You weren't supposed to, dissect how it works. It's not one of those world-building Pixar films like WALL-E or Inside Out or, something like that. It's just one of those, it's a silly premise, but really, it was just the base for a story that Lasseter wrote that was a love letter to car culture and also a love letter to the forgotten towns and, the forgotten roads, all the legendary highways of the past, the Route 66s and all those. John Lasseter was a workaholic in the late 90s, and he had realized all that time he was devoting to Pixar, he was seeing his life go by, like he wasn't spending time with his wife and kids. So after Toy Story 2, and for those of you who know almost everything about Pixar, Toy Story 2 was a production that pretty much burnt Lasseter out for obvious reasons, and so many other reasons. Lasseter took a break from the scene and he went on this road trip in the summer of 2000 with his family, and they all reconnected on that trip, and Lasseter and his family discovered all these forgotten towns. And Lasseter had already had ideas for a talking cars movie prior to the trip, prior to Toy Story 2. Around the time A Bug's Life was in development, he had ideas for a talking cars movie, but it didn't really get off the ground. That was called The Yellow Car, but it was kind of an ugly duckling story about an electric car that was picked on by all the gas guzzlers of the world. So Lasseter got the idea for Cars after his vacation, and that's why I like the first Cars so much. It's a very personal film for Lasseter, and I don't mind that it's simpler. I mean, I'm not I don't subscribe to the belief that all animated movies have to be these complex, intricate pocket watch marvels. I don't like that mindset. Some of the best animated films out there aren't all that complicated and convoluted and such. I'm not trying to say that Cars is, a masterful masterpiece. I think it's a great movie. And I think it's got great characters. It's got a very nice tone. And, it doesn't try to be anything beyond that. It just tries to be what it wants to be. Which is why the dismissal of that movie has always confused me. Cars 2, I can understand, because a lot of fans of the first Cars have problems with Cars 2. Cars 2 was a very, very troubled production, and its schedule was almost cut in half. It's amazing the movie's even watchable. I give it a 7 out of 10. It's alright. I just think that movie needed more time to stew so they could balance the spy stuff and the race around the world stuff, but I'm not here to talk about what went wrong with Cars 2. I've already ranted about that a million times. So, Cars 3. I'm in. Cars 3 sounds like it's going to be just like the first one. And it was hinted earlier, Michael Wallace, the voice of the sheriff, he said in an old interview before the movie was even announced, formally announced by Pixar and by Disney, he said that the movie was going to be about Route 99, and it's going to be interesting to see if that's still part of the plot, because it wasn't mentioned in the first look from USA Today from the other day. But I like the idea of McQueen, reaching an age where people think he should retire, people are suspecting that he might retire, and how he tries to keep up with the young rookies and how he stays in the game. And I like that, a younger car is going to teach him new tricks. Like they said, it's going to be a teach an old dog new tricks kind of story. The concept art for the movie is breathtaking. The two pieces of concept artwork that they revealed of Lightning and Cruz racing on the beach and kicking up mist, that's some great concept artwork, and hopefully we have shots like that in the movie, because again, this is Pixar. So yeah, Cars 3 could be the turnaround. I think Pixar is well aware of how badly received Cars 2 was. I mean, there's little hints and things where, like on some Twitter posts, and the teaser for Inside Out, I think, also hints at it too. I think Pixar's well aware that Cars 2 was kind of a trip up. So because, Disney wants to roll in the money that Cars toys, routinely make in sales, Cars is kind of like an ice age for Pixar in that it makes lots of money and they keep making them so they can support original projects. And Disney wants them to. I mean, that's why the Planes movies exist. That's why Disney Toon, made those movies. But yeah, Cars 3. I love the first one. Second one doesn't bother me as much as it bothers others. I think the second one's just okay. 3 sounds like it's going to be like 1. I'm in. Next up, Despicable Me 3. And I'm Despicable Me'd out. That's because if you have a Facebook account, all you see are Minions. Well, it's kind of died down now, but last year when Minions came out, that's all you frickin' saw. Minions, 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 Minions. It was like a picture of a minion with a funny, caption next to it. It was cute at first, but it just, it just got old. Seeing a minion constantly, it's like, why couldn't you use other animated characters? Like, I'd love to see more of these, like, memes with, Mickey or Minnie or Bugs Bunny. Why just minions? Once in a blue moon, I saw, memes that didn't use the minions, and it came as a shock to me. It's like, oh my god, are they actually using an animated character that isn't a minion? Real talk, I liked the first Despicable Me a great deal. I liked it a lot more than I thought I would. I saw it in theaters, actually, when it came out in 2010, and I was pleasantly surprised by how well written it was. No, it wasn't 10 out of 10 good, but it was a solid 8 out of 10. For a movie that was, mostly derivative, it actually had a lot of fun with what it had. It was kind of the usual, cartoony business, it was kind of the usual romp, but they had fun with it. I like the whole spy versus spy story where Gru has to fight another supervillain that's trying to outdo him. I think that's what made the movie interesting. And the fact that he goes from supervillain to caring father of these orphan girls, and it's not cloying or sugary or cutesy, it's actually pretty heartfelt. Now, it's not amazing, but it's good. It's pretty good. It's not the most gourmet dish at the table, but darn, it was a good dinner that filled you up. A little above comfort food, I guess. It's kind of hard to describe, but there's something about Despicable Me 1, like, you look at it from the outside, and it looks like a very bland, very, ready-made to make lots of money kind of movie. But when you watch it, you'll see that the directors and the writers had a lot of fun with it. the minions are used when they're needed, and that's what made them so cute and endearing in the movie. That's what made them funny. They were used when necessary. They weren't, they weren't being shoved into every single scene. And each scene with them was funny. But most importantly, the characters were very likable in the movie. To me, it doesn't matter if the story's been there or done that. If the characters are great and they do fun things with said story, that's all that matters. And Despicable Me did just that. It's a very solid, entertaining movie, and when I rewatched it for the first time in years not too long ago, I was still very entertained. I still found it to be a very fun movie. I missed that in Despicable Me 2. Something about Despicable Me 2 just didn't click for me. It was just ultimately very forgettable. Lucy, or whatever her name was, the female sidekick that they introduced in the movie, I didn't find her interesting at all. I didn't find the villain. What was the villain's name again? See, that's how forgettable it was. I didn't find the villain interesting. And funny thing about the villain was he was supposed to be voiced. Now this I do remember, more so than the villain himself. I remember he was supposed to be voiced by Al Pacino, but Al Pacino left the movie at the very last minute due to creative differences, and they got Benjamin Bratt in to record the dialogue. And the thing was, it was so late in the game that they chose not to reanimate all the scenes with the villain. They instead had Benjamin Bratt sync up his dialogue as best as he could to the finished animation. And I'm not saying Benjamin Bratt is not a good actor. I'm just saying the villain was just I barely, what was he like, some big luchador wrestler or something, and didn't he become like giant at the end? See, I don't remember. I found it so forgettable. I remember like the minions turning purple, and I remember, most of the stuff at the beginning, I guess. There was one thing I liked about Despicable Me 2, but at the same time it was one thing I didn't like, and it was the whole thing about the girls wanting a mother. I mean, that was a good idea, and if they had expanded on that, it would have given the movie the heart that it needed. And, it would have been similar to the first movie and how that had heart. But, no, it felt like it was thrown in at last minute. Like, oh, we got to put some emotional stuff in there. Oh, I do remember one thing. I remember Gru having the tortilla chip hat with guacamole in it. That was cool, because it made me hungry. Anyways, Minions. I saw bits and pieces of Minions, and by the time Minions came out, I was just so uninterested. And not to mention, I saw Minions everywhere. It's like, you know what? I'll just wait till, because the reviews had come in, and the reviews weren't very strong. And I just figured, you know what? I'm gonna sit this one out. I still haven't seen it, but the only thing that slightly has my interest is the fact that it's set in the 60s. But at the same time, given what I've seen, it looks like a very generalized 60s. Like, oh, look, hippies. Oh, look, this. Oh, look, peace signs. It's like, I was kind of hoping they would go for a real 60s vibe and actually dive into all the little things about the 60s. But I guess the 60s setting is just there to, I don't know, please the bored parents who took their kids to go see it. I don't know, it just seemed like another noisy animated kids flick from what I saw. Can the Minions really carry a movie? Well, apparently to audiences they could. It's the second highest grossing movie ever. Let that sink in. So, Despicable Me 3, they're going to introduce this villain who's kind of like an 80s, he's like an 80s child star, and he grows up to be a jerk. And funny thing is, his last name is Bratt. He's going to be voiced by, I believe, Trey Parker, either him or Matt Stone. But it's kind of cool to see one of the creators of South Park voicing a villain in Despicable Me. And hopefully they don't Al Pacino him. I don't want to jinx it, but hopefully they keep him on board and they get away with some, and hopefully like the humor works within the PG confines, but still very funny to adults without feeling forced. Because, it's Trey Parker. I wonder if they'll somehow nudge some South Park-esque humor into the movie, but in PG form. But not in a way where it feels like it was just shoehorned in, if you know what I mean. From everything I've seen about Despicable Me 3, it just seems like more of the same. For me, I was kind of hoping that Despicable Me 3 would be about the Minions becoming a worldwide phenomenon, and then turning evil, and then taking over the world, and Gru and Lucy, the professor, and the kids having to stop the Minions. That's a little too much to ask for. Next up, Blue Sky's Ferdinand, based on the story of Ferdinand the bull who doesn't want to do bullfights. He would prefer to be, well, a pacifist. Walt Disney told this story in the form of a short film in the 30s, so I'm interested to see how Blue Sky translates it into a 90-minute feature. There's so much we don't know about this film that I can't really say. I don't know how they can stretch it, but considering that Blue Sky is the only studio that made a decent feature-length Dr. Seuss movie, maybe they could make it work. Blue Sky to me is kind of hit or miss. Like, Ice Age 1 is good, Rio is pretty good. And then there's the Peanuts movie, of course, but for every movie like that, there's things like Rio 2, Ice Age sequels, Epic. So they're kind of hit and miss for me. But Ferdinand has potential, and hopefully they do something cool with it. I mean, when's the last time you saw an animated movie about a bull?